YouTube, we are here with Dogmatika Ritual. Now, I'll be honest, this video is probably not going to be that interesting unless you plan on playing this deck, because all of these combos kind of look the same. The deck has an interesting mechanic, but it's not actually super useful. So the new star of the show here is the White Zoa. So essentially what this card is going to do most of the time is just be a big 4000 attack monster that's unaffected by extra deck monsters' effects, basically. And then if you summon it turn 1 during your turn, basically you just get to rip half of your opponent's extra deck. So if they have a 15 card extra deck, you're going to be able to force your opponent to send 7 of them to the grave, so about half. So this first combo here is just going to be Nadir Servant, which is now at 3 copies, which is great to see, but probably unlimited for this reason, honestly. And then the new White Zoa. So there's tons of ways to get this guy out. Nadir Servant happens to be one of these ways. So right here you'll notice that I sent the Garura. An interaction that you'll see later is you can send Herald of the Arclight, but that can only search the Dogmatika Ritual monsters, because Ecclesia has higher attack than Herald of the Arclight. So we're just going to send the Garura. It's going to let us draw a card and then search the Ecclesia. We can then use the Ecclesia to search the new card, Dogmatika Matrix, or Dogmatikatrix. So when this is activated, we can add a Dogmatika Ritual or Dogmatika Ritual spell to our hand. Then if our opponent controls a monster, you can add any Dogmatika card from your deck to your hand. So if you're going second, this card is like a +3. Basically, this card is crazy. And then the other effect you'll see here in a moment, we're going to add the Calamity. Now the Calamity is a unique ritual spell in that we can send a level 12 monster from the extra deck to summon the level 12 White Zoa. Right, and then we can use the second effect of Catrix, which is we can look at either player's extra deck and send one monster from it to the grave. So we're going to send the Titaniclad. And then of course don't forget to use the White Zoa effect, which is going to make your opponent send 7 from their extra deck. They get to pick, which kind of sucks. If it was random, it would probably honestly be a bit better if it was random. But the fact that they get to pick 7 cards to send, it means they can send like their own Garura to draw a card. They can send like a Intis or something to let them pop your Matrix, because White Zoa only protects your ritual monsters, not your Dogmatika monsters, not your Dogmatika spells and traps. The Matrix will let you send a card you choose from your opponent's extra to the grave. So that's an 8th card that you've now ripped out of their extra, and you get to pick like the most important one. So like maybe a Gigantic Sprite, maybe like a Kaleido Heart, something that's essential to your opponent's deck. But for this example, we're just going to send the Titaniclad, which will let us, during the end phase, add the Fleur-de-Lis. We're ending with 1 negate. We ripped half of our opponent's extra. And White Zoa is just kind of hard to get rid of sometimes. There is this one card called Sprite Pixies that you might have heard of that outs this guy, which kind of sucks. He also gets outed by like Neospatian Grand Mole. How useful this card is gonna be is really just gonna come and go. Like I don't think it would be good right now in the current meta, but you know, maybe one day it'll actually be useful. So Diviner enables a lot of very unique plays for the deck. It lets you send cards like Herald to search any ritual monster or ritual spell. And it's also a tuner, which is nice. And it's also potentially a artifact Dagda, which you will see later in the video. It also has less than 1000 attack, which means we can send something like a Herald here to search for our White Zoa, and then link it off for the Almirage. So even though we've already normal summoned, we now have a extra deck monster on the board, which lets us, after we draw with the Garura, we can summon the Ecclesia to search for the Matrix. And then this will be the same as last time, basically. We're going to send the final Sugma, summon the White Zoa, and then we can either rip a card out of our opponent's or rip a card out of ours to get the Titaniclad, which will then give us the Fleur-de-Lis, which will be a monster negate, because we do control 2 Dogmatika monsters, which are all unaffected, and Fleur-de-Lis would also be unaffected, so plus the Almirage can now protect any of these from like any kind of main deck monster destruction, like a Pankratops. It can protect them from Pankratops. It can protect them from the new Kshatriya Law Fenrir as well. So this, like I said earlier, there's plenty of ways to get to kind of the same position. Now, it's not often that you see this anymore, but this is a ritual deck that can play pre-prep. I feel like most ritual decks these days kind of just have generic rituals and generic ritual spells that don't work with pre-prep. But this one does have one card in particular, because White Knight mentions Dogmatika Calamity, which is this one here. So pre-prep does actually work in this deck. However, Dogmatika Calamity isn't really the good one, unfortunately, because this is the one that banishes from grave, where the one that sends from extra is way better. But we're going to go for the same thing again here, send the Garura, because it's just a free draw, and it searches the Ecclesia, so it's basically just Sky Striker engage for a deck like this. Ecclesia will get the Matrix yet again, and the Matrix will add us the Calamity, so now we do have access to the Calamity. The Calamity, we're going to send the Titaniclad this time, so normally we would send this off of the Matrix later, but we can go ahead and send it now because this is a level 8, so we can use the level 8 to ritual summon the level 8. And then with the Matrix, instead of sending the Titaniclad, we're going to send Herald. But we're going to add the White Zoa here. And then we can banish the Garura, the Herald, and the Ecclesia off of our field. Because we can't banish the Titaniclad because we won't get its effect during the end phase, so we have to send the Ecclesia from our field, but that's fine because she doesn't do much anyway after we already use her effect. Right, and then of course you can use the White Zoa to rip their extra. White Knight is a card I'll show off here in a second. And then of course we get the Fleur-de-Lis during the end phase, which will be a monster negate. Right, so White Knight, what he does is after our opponent activates a card effect, so this will happen on a new chain. So after this card resolves, on a new chain, he will use his effect. So we can look at our extra deck and our opponent's extra deck and send one card from each of them to the grave. So this is like a targeted, so we've already ripped 7 with White Zoa, and Dogmatika White Knight will rip an 8th card, but this one we will get to choose. So White Zoa kind of just removes their entire toolbox, right? They're going to keep all the things that they need for their main plays, but this will completely remove their toolbox, basically. But then the White Knight can remove cards that they really need for their plays, like a Gigantic Sprite or a Sprite Elf or something like that. So we can rip out like one of their most important cards, and we can send an Intis, which is the main form of disruption that this deck is going to have. Right, so Intis is just going to pop any card. So here I'm going to be showcasing the second use for Diviner, which is going to be to make a Link 2 off of the normal summon. So this is very common in like agent decks, because this lets you make a the agent synchro monster really fast. But we're going to send the Trias, which is going to tribute the Herald, summon itself back. And then we can summon like any fairy from our deck here. I was testing out Cyber Angels because if you summon a card like Petite Angel, you get to search for a Ben 10. And then these two combined equal level 8 to summon the White Knight. So I was kind of testing that, but hey, that's probably not good. The main thing you want to know here is that these two monsters make Dagda. And that's pretty much all you need to get to, is just two monsters to make Dagda. So then we can use a card like Nadir, and then we can chain the Dagda since a card on the field was activated to set the Scythe. Yes, this card still exists. We're going to add the White Knight here. And then we're going to send the Herald off of the Nadir this time, because we do need the ritual spell. And luckily, Herald has 600 attack, and White Knight has 500 attack, so coincidentally, it just kind of works out like that. Or maybe that's how it was designed to work. Who knows? So we get to use the Calamity here. We're going to send the Titaniclad to summon the White Knight. And then during the end phase, we get to add the Fleur-de-Lis, which is going to be a monster negate for us. So let's say they just normal summon a monster and they use their monster's effect. We can either just shotgun the Fleur here to negate, or we can let it resolve if we're not worried about it. Because after resolution, we are going to use the White Knight to send the Intis, but instead of popping the Herald with the Intis, we're going to pop our Scythe, which will then summon. And then, if you don't know what Scythe does, which I'm guessing most of you know what it does, is that if it's destroyed during your opponent's turn, you can summon it. And if it's summoned, your opponent cannot special from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. So basically, our opponent gets one card. They get like one card effect, and then we just get to Scythe Lock them off of the White Knight. You know, plus we get to like rip a card out of their extra deck as well. So Scythe might not be too prevalent currently, but this deck is going to be a deck that can make Scythe fairly easily, as long as you're able to make a Dagda before you lock yourself out of the extra. Because Nadir locks you out of the extra, and White Knight also says you cannot special from the extra. So any way that you can get to Dagda before summoning the White Knight basically guarantees a Scythe Lock. And there, you know, a card like Diviner, which you play in the deck anyway, can get you there if you want to run like a few extra little fairies to help you get there. And then finally, the third use that you have for Diviner is that after you send a card like Herald, she becomes a level 6 tuner. So then, for example, if you draw Diviner plus White Knight or White Relic, you can send the Herald, search the Cabre, and then banish the Herald as material for the White Relic. Now White Relic does not lock you out of the extra, which means you can use the Diviner and the White Relic to make Baron. So then, from here, you can kind of just make any plays you want while also being protected from hand traps. You know, so if you draw like a pre-prep, you can use that, or if you draw like a Nadir, you can do that too. So for example, this board would be 3 interruptions, because you have the Baron negate, you have the Fleur-de-Lis negate, and you also have the White Knight, which can send the Intis and pop a card, as well as look at your opponent's extra deck, so you get full extra deck knowledge. Or instead of making the Baron, you could have just made a Scythe. You could have made Dagda right there instead. So this deck has tons of flexible plays. You just have to be really careful not to lock yourself out of the extra beforehand. And then finally, we're just going to end off with something kind of funny. This probably isn't practical. You might be able to pull this off like 1 out of every 10 games maybe. But this is more of just a showcase of what Zaborg can do. So let's say you get like 2 monsters on field using the incantations. We're going to get the ritual spell to summon the White Zoa here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then we're going to use the White Zoa. We're going to rip 7 out of our opponent's extra deck. And then we are going to tribute summon the Zaborg. And Zaborg, if he's tribute summoned using a light monster, you get to destroy a card on the field, and then both players send from their extra deck to the graveyard equal to the level of the monster that was destroyed. So basically, we're going to destroy itself because it's level 8. This will make it so that we have to send 8 from our extra, and our opponent has to send 8 from their extra. And if you notice, they have exactly 8, because Zoa rips 7, Zaborg rips 8, so that is the full 15 gone from their extra deck. For us, however, we get to send cards like Titaniclad, like Herald, like Garura, which will just give us absolutely insane amounts of advantage. So we rip apart our opponent's whole extra deck, and then we get to like go plus 3 cards off of the Zaborg effect. So you can see here we got like, you can search a ritual spell and a monster and draw a card, and then the Titaniclad will trigger during the end phase. So it's just kind of crazy if you can actually pull this off. The problem is you have to find a way to get to the Mega Zaborg, which the only way I can really think of is like Small World. I'm not too familiar with the way people played Zaborg in the past and like Necros and stuff. I'm not too familiar with that stuff, but yeah, it's just a funny way that you can rip your opponent's whole extra deck and then gain a bunch of advantage.